Everyone thought Elena Rivera was the luckiest woman alive. She was engaged to David Hartley, the only son of billionaire Thomas Hartley, who owned one of the biggest technology companies in the country. Their engagement photos were all over social media. People called them the perfect couple. Elena was beautiful, successful, and always knew exactly what to say. She ran her own fashion line and appeared at charity events with a smile that could light up any room. David seemed completely in love with her, and why wouldn't he be? She was everything anyone could want, but nobody knew what was really happening behind the closed doors of the Hartley mansion. Nobody saw the real Elena, the one who existed when the cameras weren't flashing and the guests had gone home. Nobody knew that beneath all that perfection was a woman with a dark secret and an even darker plan. It all started to fall apart on a Tuesday evening in late October. David had been acting strange for weeks. He spent hours locked in his study, going through old documents and making phone calls when he thought Elena wasn't listening. She noticed the change in him right away. After all, she'd spent 2 years studying every detail of his behavior, learning how to read his moods, how to manipulate his emotions. That's what made her so good at what she did. That particular evening, Elena was in the hallway outside David's study when she heard him on the phone with his lawyer. She pressed her ear against the heavy wooden door, her heart pounding in her chest. What she heard made her blood run cold. "I want to change my will before the wedding," David was saying. "I've been thinking about this for a long time. Most of my inheritance should go to charity. The children's hospitals, the education programs we talked about. I'll keep enough to live comfortably, but I don't need $800 million. That money could change so many lives." Elena's hands clenched into fists. $800 million. Money that should have been hers. Money she had worked so hard for, played her part so perfectly for. She'd spent 2 years of her life pretending to love this man, laughing at his jokes, listening to his boring business stories, sharing his bed. And now he wanted to give it all away? But that wasn't even the worst part. David's next words made her feel like the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. "There's something else," David continued, his voice dropping lower. "I need you to look into something for me. My mother's death 2 years ago. I found some financial records that don't make sense. Large payments to offshore accounts, medical records that seem altered. I think someone might have been poisoning her slowly. I know this sounds crazy, but the timeline matches exactly with when Elena came into my life." Elena stepped back from the door, her mind racing. He knew, or at least he suspected. She'd been so careful, so precise with every detail. The old woman's death had looked completely natural. Heart failure wrought on by stress and age. The doctors hadn't questioned it. The family had been sad but accepting. It was perfect, except now it wasn't. She walked quickly back to their bedroom, her mind already working through her options. She couldn't let David talk to that lawyer again. She couldn't let him dig any deeper into the past. Everything she'd worked for was about to disappear, and worse, she could end up in prison for the rest of her life. Elena had grown up with nothing. Absolutely nothing. While other kids worried about what to wear to school, she worried about whether there would be food for dinner. She'd watched her mother work 3 jobs and still die broke and exhausted at 45. Elena had promised herself it would never be her story. She would do whatever it took to have money, real money, the kind that meant she'd never have to worry about anything ever again. David's mother had been her first real obstacle. The old woman had never liked her, never trusted her. She'd told David that Elena was after his money, that something about her didn't feel right. So Elena had taken care of that problem. Slowly, carefully, over several months. Small amounts of poison in her tea, in her medication. Everyone just thought the old woman's heart was giving out. Now David was going to ruin everything. That evening, She made dinner for David herself, something she rarely did. She sent the house staff home early, saying she wanted a quiet, romantic evening with her fiancé. David seemed surprised but pleased. He had no idea what was coming. "I've been thinking about us," Elena said sweetly as they sat in the dining room. "About our future together. I love that you want to help people, David. It's one of the things I admire most about you." David smiled at her, that trusting smile that made her want to scream. How could someone be so naive, so stupid? He was a billionaire's son who'd never had to fight for anything, who thought the world was full of good people with pure intentions. "I knew you'd understand," he said. "I was worried you might be upset about the will changes." "Upset? Of course not," Elena lied smoothly. "We'll still have more than enough. Money isn't why I love you." She poured him a glass of his favorite wine, the expensive red he kept in the cellar for special occasions. She'd already added the crushed sleeping pills to it while he was washing his hands. Strong ones, enough to knock out a man twice his size. "To us," she said, raising her own glass. "To us," David repeated, and drank deeply. They talked for another 20 minutes. But Elena watched as his words began to slur, as his eyes grew heavy. He tried to stand up, confusion crossing his face, but his legs wouldn't support him. He collapsed back into his chair. "Elena, I don't feel well. Something's wrong." "I know, darling," she said softly, all pretense of warmth gone from her voice. "You shouldn't have dug into the past, David. You shouldn't have tried to change that will. This is your own fault, really." The fear in his eyes, as he realized what was happening, almost made her feel something. Almost. But Elena had learned long ago how to turn off that part of herself. The part that felt guilt or compassion. Emotions were weaknesses, and she couldn't afford weaknesses. She made a phone call, and 20 minutes later, Carlo arrived at the back entrance. Carlo was David's driver, a man who'd been with the family for 5 years. He was also deeply in debt from gambling, and Elena had been paying off those debts for months. He was her insurance policy, her backup plan. Every smart person had one. "Is it done?" Carlo asked nervously. "Almost," Elena replied. "Help me get him to the car." The storm outside was perfect. Loud thunder and heavy rain that covered any noise they made. They carried David's unconscious body to the old Land Rover they kept in the garage for the estate workers. Elena had planned every detail. They drove to the far edge of the property, where the old oak trees grew thick and wild, where nobody ever went. Carlo had already dug the hole earlier that day, deep enough but not too deep. They needed him to have a little air at first, just in case. They put him in a simple wooden box that Carlo had built, lowered it into the ground, and began shoveling dirt back into the hole. "Are you sure about this?" Carlo asked, his hands shaking. "It's too late for doubts now," Elena said coldly. "Keep digging. We have a missing person to report." Within an hour, the grave was covered, the ground smoothed over, the tools hidden away. They drove back to the mansion separately. Elena took a long shower, changed into pajamas, messed up her hair a bit. Then she called the police, her voice breaking with just the right amount of panic. "My fiancé is missing. Please, you have to help me find him." And just like that, she became the heartbroken woman everyone felt sorry for. The devastated bride-to-be whose perfect future had been stolen away. The cameras came, the reporters asked their questions, and Elena cried beautiful tears for all of them to see. Nobody suspected her. After all, she was the victim in this story. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. Rosa Lopez couldn't sleep. She'd worked at the Hartley mansion for 17 years, ever since she'd arrived in this country with nothing but a suitcase and a dream of giving her children a better life. In all those years, she'd seen everything. She'd watched David grow from a young man into someone kind and thoughtful, someone who always remembered her birthday and asked about her grandchildren. She'd served his mother until the day that sweet old woman had died, and she'd watched Elena Rivera walk into their lives like a beautiful storm. But something was wrong. Rosa had felt it in her bones for weeks now, that heavy feeling in her chest that her grandmother used to call the knowing. It was the same feeling she'd had the night before her mother passed away, the same feeling she'd had when her husband got into that car accident 5 years ago. Something bad was happening, and she couldn't shake it. 2 days had passed since David disappeared. The police were everywhere, asking questions, searching the nearby towns, checking security cameras. Elena played her part perfectly, crying at just the right moments, her voice trembling when she spoke to reporters. "Please, if anyone has seen him, if anyone knows anything, please come forward. I just want him home safe." Rosa watched it all from the shadows of the mansion, serving coffee to police officers, cleaning rooms that didn't need cleaning, just to stay busy, just to stop herself from thinking too much. Because the more she watched Elena, the more that heavy feeling in her chest grew stronger. She'd seen things. Small things that maybe didn't mean anything by themselves, but together they painted a picture that made her sick to her stomach. She'd seen Elena standing at the window that stormy night, perfectly cal. 1,000 while everyone else panicked about David being missing. She'd seen Carlo, the driver, washing the old Land Rover at midnight, scrubbing dirt from the tires with shaking hands. She'd noticed how Elena's eyes were completely dry when she thought no one was watching, how she checked her phone constantly with a strange little smile. Rosa had tried to tell herself she was imagining things. Elena was in shock, that's all. People handled grief differently. Maybe Carlo was just a nervous person. Maybe Rosa was just a foolish old woman who watched too many crime shows on television. But her grandmother's voice echoed in her head. "Trust the knowing, Mia. When your soul speaks, you listen." On the second evening after David's disappearance, Rosa did something she'd done every night for 17 years. She took her evening walk around the estate grounds. It was her quiet time, her moment of peace after long days of cooking and cleaning and pretending not to hear the private conversations of rich people. The police had finished their search of the property hours ago, finding nothing. Elena had finally gone to her room, saying she needed to rest before tomorrow's press conference. The air was cool and damp from the recent rain. Rosa wrapped her cardigan tighter around her shoulders and walked her usual path, past the rose garden that David's mother had loved so much, past the fountain that hadn't worked properly in years, past the greenhouse where tomatoes grew in neat rows. She was heading toward the old oak grove when she stopped suddenly. The grove was at the far edge of the property, a wild place where the trees grew thick and the groundskeepers rarely bothered to go. Rosa herself hadn't walked there in months, but something was pulling her in that direction tonight. That same knowing feeling that had kept her awake for 2 days. She changed her path, walking slowly through the overgrown grass toward the oak trees. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of orange and purple. It should have been beautiful, but Rosa felt nothing but dread with each step she took. Then she heard it. A sound so faint she almost missed it. A soft thumping noise, like someone knocking on a door very far away. She stopped walking, holding her breath, listening with every part of her being. Thump, thump, thump. It was coming from the ground. Rosa's heart began to race. She took a few more steps, following the sound, and then she heard something that made her blood turn to ice. A voice, weak and desperate, barely more than a whisper, but unmistakably human. "Help, please, someone, Rosa dropped to her knees so fast she felt the impact through her whole body. She pressed her ear to the damp earth, her hands flat against the ground. The voice came again, muffled by dirt and wood and whatever else was between her and the person below. Help me, ... She knew that voice. Even through the earth, even weak and broken, she knew it. It was David. Rosa's hands started shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. Her mind raced with impossible thoughts. David was buried here. Buried alive. Someone had put him in the ground, and he was still breathing, still calling for help. How long had he been down there? 2 days? Was that even possible? She wanted to scream. She wanted to run back to the mansion and call the police and tell them to dig right here, right now. But something stopped her. That same instinct that had brought her to this spot now told her to be very, very careful, because if David was in the ground, someone had put him there, and that someone was probably still in the mansion right now, watching and waiting. If Elena found out David was still alive, what would she do? Would she come back and finish what she started? Would she disappear before anyone could stop her? And what about Carlo? He was bigger than Rosa, stronger. If he knew she'd discovered the truth, would he hurt her too? Would they bury her right next to David? Rosa looked around frantically, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The sun was almost down now. In 15 minutes, it would be completely dark. The mansion was far away, maybe a 10-minute walk. She could see one security camera on the corner of the building, but it didn't point this direction. Nobody could see her here. Nobody knew where she was. She pressed her ear to the ground again. David, can you hear me? It's Rosa. There was a long silence, and for a terrible moment she thought maybe she'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe grief and exhaustion had finally broken her mind. But then the voice came again, slightly stronger this time. Rosa? Oh God, Rosa, help me. Please. Can't breathe. Much longer. Tears streamed down Rosa's face. This sweet boy, this kind man who'd always treated her like family, was dying under her feet. Every second mattered. But she had to think. She had to be smart about this, or they'd both end up dead. David, listen to me, she whispered to the ground, hoping he could hear her. I'm going to get you out. But I need to do this carefully. Can you hold on? Just a little longer? The response was so quiet, she almost didn't hear it. Hurry, ... please, ... Rosa stood up, her knees weak, her mind racing through possibilities. She couldn't go to the police, not yet. Elena would hear about it immediately. The mansion was crawling with people, with cameras, with reporters. If Rosa walked in and said she'd found David buried alive, how long before Elena knew? 5 minutes? 10? No, she had to do this alone. At least at first. She needed to get David out of the ground, get him somewhere safe, somewhere Elena couldn't find him. Then they could figure out what to do next. Rosa looked at her watch. It was 7:30. The evening staff would be finishing up dinner service right now. Most of them would be gone by 8. Elena was in her room, probably planning her next tearful interview. Carlo had left hours ago, saying he needed to visit his sick mother. This was her window. Maybe her only window. She stood up and started walking quickly back toward the mansion, her mind making lists. She would need a shovel, work gloves, a flashlight, water for David, maybe a blanket. Her cottage was on the far side of the estate, a small 2-room house where she'd lived alone since her husband died. It was private, hidden by trees. Elena had never been there, not once in 2 years. It was perfect. As Rosa walked, she forced herself to breathe slowly, to calm down. She couldn't let anyone see her panic. If she ran into Elena or any of the staff, she had to act normal. Just Rosa, taking her evening walk. Nothing unusual at all. She entered through the servants' entrance at the back of the mansion, walking straight to the storage room where the gardening tools were kept. Her hands were steadier now. She had a plan. That was good. Plans kept you focused, kept you alive. She gathered what she needed quietly, stuffing items into a large canvas bag. A shovel, a pry bar, heavy gloves, a flashlight, a bottle of water from the kitchen, some protein bars from her personal stash. She thought about calling someone, anyone, but who would believe her? And what if they accidentally tipped off Elena? No, this was on her. A 54-year-old housemaid who'd spent her whole life cleaning other people's homes was now the only thing standing between David and death. Rosa walked past the security guard at the front gate, giving him her usual warm smile. "Just checking on my garden before bed," she told him. "These late autumn nights are beautiful, aren't they?" "They sure are, Mrs. Lopez. You have a good evening." She walked into the darkness, the heavy bag pulling at her shoulder, her heart racing with fear and determination. Somewhere behind her, in the big mansion with all its lights and luxury, a murderer was probably sleeping soundly. But out here, in the dark and the cold, a good man was counting his final breaths. Rosa had never thought of herself as brave. She was just a woman who cleaned houses and cooked meals and sent money back home to her family. But tonight, she was going to save a life. Or die trying. The oak grove loomed ahead of her, dark and silent. Rosa whispered a prayer her grandmother had taught her long ago, gripped the shovel tightly, and began to dig. Rosa's hands blistered within the first 15 minutes. She'd been digging for what felt like hours, but her watch told her it had only been 20 minutes. The shovel hit the ground again and again, each scoop of dirt feeling heavier than the last. Sweat poured down her face despite the cool night air, and her back screamed in pain, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop, David. She called down every few minutes. "David, can you hear me? Stay with me." Sometimes he answered. Sometimes she heard nothing, and those moments of silence were worse than anything she'd ever experienced. Was he unconscious? Was he already gone? She dug faster, her breath coming in short gasps, her muscles burning. The moon had risen now, giving her just enough light to see by. She'd turned off her flashlight after the first few minutes, terrified that someone from the mansion might see it and come to investigate. Every sound made her jump. The wind in the trees sounded like footsteps. An owl's cry made her heart stop for a full second. Then her shovel hit something solid, wood. "Oh, thank God," Rosa whispered, falling to her knees. She cleared the dirt away with her hands now, faster and faster, until she could see the outline of wooden planks. They'd built a box, a crude coffin. Her stomach turned as she realized how carefully they'd planned this, how cold and calculated it had been done. She grabbed the pry bar and wedged it under the planks. The wood was new, not old and rotted, which made it harder. She pushed down with all her weight, and the first plank cracked. Then another. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night. Rosa froze, listening, but no one came. She went back to work, pulling the broken planks away until she'd made an opening large enough to reach through. The smell that rose up made her gag. Damp earth, human waste, and something else. Fear. Death. She covered her nose and mouth with her cardigan and looked down into the darkness. "David?" A weak cough answered her. Then a voice, barely more than a whisper. "Rosa, is that really you?" Tears poured down Rosa's face. "Yes, baby. I'm here. I'm going to get you out." She widened the opening more, pulling away plank after plank until she could see him. David was lying in the small space, covered in dirt, his face pale as death in the moonlight. His lips were cracked and bleeding, his eyes sunken. He'd aged 10 years in 2 days. "Can you move?" she asked. "Can you grab my hands?" David tried to sit up and cried out in pain. His whole body was cramping from being in that small space for so long. Rosa reached down and grabbed his arms, pulling with strength she didn't know she had. He was a grown man, much bigger than her. But somehow she got him out of that hole, inch by painful inch, until he collapsed on the ground beside the grave. He lay there shaking, taking huge gulping breaths of fresh air. Rosa opened the water bottle and helped him drink, supporting his head. He drank too fast and choked, water spilling down his dirt-covered shirt. "Slow down," Rosa said gently. "Slow down, David. You're safe now." But they both knew that wasn't quite true. Not yet. After a few minutes, David could speak in more than whispers. "She tried to kill me. Elena. She and Carlo, they drugged me, buried me alive. I've been down there for 2 days, Rosa. 2 days in the dark, barely able to breathe, thinking I was going to die alone in that hole." His voice broke, and Rosa held him while he cried. This strong, successful man who'd had everything, reduced to this broken state by someone he trusted, someone he'd loved. "I know, sweetheart. I know, but we need to move. Can you walk? We have to get you somewhere safe." David tried to stand, and his legs buckled. Rosa caught him, her small frame supporting as much of his weight as she could. Together, they stumbled through the darkness toward her cottage. It took them almost 20 minutes to cover what should have been a 5-minute walk. David had to stop every few steps, leaning against trees, fighting the pain in his muscles and the dizziness from dehydration. Rosa kept looking back toward the mansion, expecting to see lights, to hear shouts, to see Elena or Carlo running toward them. But the night stayed quiet. They made it to her cottage without being seen, and Rosa quickly locked the door behind them, closing all the curtains before she dared turn on a light dot in the light. David looked even worse. His clothes were filthy and torn. His hands were bloody from trying to claw his way out of the coffin. There was a cut on his forehead that had dried into a dark scab. But he was alive. Impossibly, miraculously alive. Rosa filled her bathtub with warm water and helped David wash while she found clean clothes. Her late husband's clothes were still in the closet, and they fit David well enough. Then she made him sit at her small kitchen table while she heated up some soup. Nothing too heavy. His stomach wouldn't be able to handle real food yet. While he ate slowly, barely managing a few spoonfuls, Rosa cleaned and bandaged his hands. Neither of them spoke much. There was too much to process, too much to figure out. Finally, David set down his spoon and looked at her with hollow eyes. "We can't go to the police." "Not yet." Rosa was surprised. "What, David? We have to. Elena tried to murder you. She killed your mother. She needs to be arrested. With what proof?" David asked bitterly. "It's her word against mine. She'll say I'm having a mental breakdown, that I disappeared on my own, and now I'm making up stories. Carlo will back her up. They'll say I'm unstable, that the stress of the wedding was too much. And my mother's case? All the evidence I had was in my study. I guarantee you Elena has destroyed it by now." Rosa sat down heavily. He was right. She could see it playing out exactly as he described. Elena was smart. She'd covered her tracks. 2 days was plenty of time to get rid of anything incriminating. Then what do we do? Rosa asked. David was quiet for a long moment, staring at his bandaged hands. When he looked up, there was something different in his eyes. Something hard and determined that hadn't been there before. Death had changed him. "We make her confess," he said. "We set a trap. But we have to be smart about it. We have to be as calculating as she is." Rosa felt a chill run down her spine. "How?" David leaned forward. "Right now, Elena thinks I'm dead. That's our advantage. Tomorrow morning, There's supposed to be a reading of my will. My lawyer, my father's business partners, Elena, and a few key family members will all be there. Elena knows that Will doesn't leave her much. She won't be happy about it. So we let the reading happen. We watch how she reacts. And we record everything. David's voice grew stronger as he talked through his plan. 3 months ago, when I first started suspecting something was wrong, I had security cameras installed all through the mansion. Hidden ones, not the obvious ones everyone knows about. Elena doesn't know they exist. They're all connected to a secure cloud server. Everything that happens in that house, it's recorded. Rosa's eyes widened. Can we access them from here? We can. I have my phone still, in my jacket. If it's not completely destroyed. He patted his pockets and pulled out a mud-covered phone. His hands shook as he tried to turn it on. Nothing happened. The screen stayed black. No, 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 David muttered, wiping dirt off the screen desperately. He tried again. Still nothing. Rosa stood up. Wait here? She went to her bedroom and came back with a bag of rice. Put it in here. Sometimes this helps when electronics get wet. We'll leave it overnight. They had no choice but to wait. David was exhausted anyway, barely able to keep his eyes open. Rosa gave him her bed and made herself comfortable on the small couch in her living room. But neither of them really slept that night. Every sound outside made them tense. Every car that passed on the distant road made them wonder if someone was coming. Around 3 a.m, David spoke into the darkness. Rosa, why did you save me? You could have walked away. Pretended you never heard anything. You put yourself in danger for me. Rosa was quiet for a moment. Your mother was kind to me. When I first came to this country, I didn't speak English well. I was scared all the time. She treated me like family, not like a servant. When she died, I promised myself I'd look after you. Besides, her voice softened, you're a good man, David. The world needs more good men. Thank you, David said simply. I owe you my life. You don't owe me anything. Just promise me something. Anything. When this is over, when Elena is behind bars where she belongs, promise me you'll be more careful about who you trust. Not everyone with a pretty smile has a good heart. David was quiet, and Rosa thought he might have fallen asleep. But then he spoke, his voice hard. I'll never trust anyone blindly again. Elena taught me that lesson. Now it's time I teach her one. You can't bury the truth. It always finds a way to come back. As the sun began to rise, painting Rosa's small cottage in shades of pink and gold, they both knew that today would change everything. By tonight, Elena would either be in handcuffs or they would both be dead. There was no middle ground anymore. David tried his phone one more time. The screen flickered, then came to life. He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He opened the security app with shaking hands, and there it was. Multiple camera feeds from all over the mansion, all still recording, all still saving to the cloud. He looked at Rosa, and for the first time in days, he smiled. We've got her. We just need to let her hang herself. The reading of the will was scheduled for 10 o'clock. They had 4 hours to prepare. 4 hours to make sure Elena's perfect crime turned into her perfect downfall. Rosa made coffee, strong and black, and they sat together at her small kitchen table, watching the mansion on David's phone screen. Elena was already awake. They could see her in the master bedroom, trying on different outfits. Black dress, too dramatic. Navy suit, too businesslike. Finally settling on something in between. She practiced her sad expression in the mirror, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. She's a monster, Rosa whispered. Yes, David agreed. But even monsters make mistakes. And we're going to be there when she makes hers. The mansion's library had never felt so heavy with tension. Rosa stood in the corner by the coffee service, exactly where she was supposed to be, her hands steady as she poured drinks for the assembled guests. Nobody paid attention to her. They never did. That's what made her the perfect witness to everything that was about to happen. Thomas Hartley sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his face drawn and tired. He'd aged 20 years since his son's disappearance. David's uncle and aunt were there too, along with 3 board members from the company and Mr. Peterson, the family lawyer who'd known David since he was a boy. And then there was Elena, dressed in a perfectly chosen gray dress, her eyes red from what everyone assumed were tears. Rosa had to give her credit. Elena was a spectacular actress. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, a crumpled tissue held delicately in one hand, looking like a woman barely holding herself together. Every few minutes, she'd dab at her eyes, her shoulders shaking just slightly. If Rosa didn't know the truth, even she might have believed it. But Rosa did know the truth. And so did David, who was watching everything from her cottage on his phone, the security cameras capturing every angle of the room. He'd also made 2 other calls that morning. One to his father's head of security, a former police detective named Frank Morrison, and one to District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, someone David had worked with on charity projects and who he trusted completely. Both were on their way to the estate now. Waiting for David's signal, Mr. Peterson cleared his throat and opened a leather folder. Thank you all for coming during this difficult time. As you know, we're here to discuss David's will and estate planning. While we all pray for his safe return, it's important that we understand his wishes as they currently stand. Elena leaned forward slightly, her face a mask of polite attention. Rosa watched her carefully. This was the moment Elena had been waiting for. The moment she thought she'd finally secured her fortune. Mr. Peterson began reading. The will was detailed and specific, going through various properties and investments. Elena's expression stayed neutral, patient. But Rosa could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped that tissue just a little too tightly. Then Mr. Peterson got to the main clause. As for the primary estate and liquid assets, totaling approximately $800 million, David has specified that 90% should be directed to the Hartley Foundation for charitable distribution, focusing on children's hospitals, education programs, and medical research. The room was silent. Thomas nodded slowly, pride and sadness mixing on his face. That sounds like my son, Mr. Peterson continued. The remaining 10% is to be held in trust, with Elena Rivera as a beneficiary, providing her with an annual income of approximately $2 million for life, provided she remains unmarried. $2 million. It was more money than most people would ever see. But it wasn't $800 million. It wasn't the fortune Elena had killed for. Rosa watched Elena's face carefully. For just a split second, something dark flashed across her features. Rage, pure and undiluted. But she controlled it almost instantly, pressing that tissue to her mouth, making a small sound that could have been a sob. I don't care about the money, Elena said, her voice breaking beautifully. I just want David back. Nothing else matters. More lies, smooth as silk. Rosa had to grip the coffee pot tightly to keep from shaking with anger. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, discussing details and paperwork. Finally, people began to stand, offering Elena their condolences, promising to do everything they could to find David. Thomas hugged her, and Rosa saw Elena close her eyes, leaning into the embrace like a grieving daughter. We'll find him, Thomas said firmly. I haven't given up hope. My son is strong. If only he knew how right he was. People began to leave, filing out of the library. Rosa continued her work, collecting empty cups, wiping down the table. Elena stayed seated, staring at nothing, maintaining her grief-stricken pose until she was sure everyone was gone. Then she stood up and walked to the window, pulling out her phone. Rosa's heart raced. This was it. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. Elena dialed a number, and Rosa could hear her side of the conversation clearly. It's done. The will has been read. $2 million a year. Can you believe that? $2 million when there's $800 million sitting there. Her voice was cold now, all pretense of sadness gone. We did all of this for $2 million a year. Rosa moved quietly to the next table, staying in character, staying invisible. Elena didn't even glance her way. No, don't come to the house, Elena said sharply. Are you insane? The place is crawling with people. Meet me at the Oak Grove in 30 minutes. We need to make sure everything is still secure. The Oak Grove, where they'd buried David. Rosa felt ice water run through her veins. They were going to check the grave. Elena ended the call and walked out of the library, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Rosa waited until she was sure Elena was gone, then pulled out her own phone. David answered on the first ring. She's going to the Grove in 30 minutes, Rosa whispered urgently. To meet Carlo, to check on the grave. Perfect, David said, and Rosa could hear the grim satisfaction in his voice. Frank and Jennifer are almost here. Get out of the house, Rosa. Go back to the cottage. This is going to get dangerous. No, Rosa said firmly. I'm following her. You'll need someone close by in case something goes wrong. Rosa, I didn't save you just to let you walk into danger alone, Rosa interrupted. I'm coming. End of discussion. She ended the call before he could argue further. Her hands were shaking now, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had work to do. 20-5 minutes later, Rosa was hidden behind a large oak tree about 50 feet from the gravesite. She'd gotten there first, moving quickly through paths she'd walked for 17 years. From her position, she could see the disturbed earth where she dug David out, the broken wooden planks scattered around the hole. Elena arrived right on time, walking quickly through the trees. She stopped when she saw the grave, her whole body going rigid. Even from this distance, Rosa could see her face go pale. No, Elena whispered. No, no, no. She ran to the hole and looked down into the empty grave. Her hands flew to her hair, gripping it tightly, her carefully maintained composure shattering completely. How is this possible? Where is he? Carlo came crashing through the trees a moment later, breathing hard. What's wrong? Why did you sound so? He stopped when he saw the empty grave. Oh God, this can't be happening. He's alive, Elena hissed. David is alive. Someone found him and dug him up. 2 days in the ground, and someone found him. Maybe he got out himself? Carlo suggested weakly. Elena whirled on him. Don't be an idiot. Look at this. Someone dug him up from the outside. Someone knew he was here. But who? Who would even think to look here? Rosa pressed herself against the tree, barely breathing. Her phone was in her pocket, recording everything. David had taught her how to do it before she left the cottage. It doesn't matter who, Elena said, her voice turning sharp and calculating. What matters is what David knows and who he's told. If he goes to the police, we're finished. We need to find him before he can talk. Elena, maybe we should just run. Take what we can and disappear. I have contacts in Mexico. We could run? Elena laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. With what money, Carlo? That will give me $2 million a year. $2 million that I only get if I stay here, if I play the grieving fiancé. If we run now, we get nothing. Nothing. After everything we've done? After everything we've done, we could go to prison for the rest of our lives. Carlo's voice was rising, panic clear in every word. You killed his mother, Elena. You buried him alive. This isn't just fraud anymore. It's murder. Attempted murder. They'll put us away forever. They have to catch us first, Elena said coldly. And they have to prove it. David's been in the ground for 2 days. He's probably half out of his mind. Who's going to believe him? We'll say he had a breakdown, that he buried himself in some psychotic episode. We'll say he's making up stories because he's confused, traumatized. You really think that will work? It has to work. Because the alternative is spending the rest of my life in a cell, and that's not going to happen. I've come too far, sacrificed too much. Elena's voice dropped lower, venomous. I grew up with nothing, Carlo. Nothing. I watched my mother work herself to death for pennies while rich people like the Hartleys threw away more money in a week than she made in a year. I promised myself I'd never be poor again, never be powerless again. And I'm not going to let David or anyone else take that away from me. So what do? Carlo asked. We find him. He can't have gone far, not in his condition. He's probably in a hospital somewhere, or maybe at a friend's house. We find him, and we finish this. Properly this time. Rosa's blood ran cold. They were planning to kill David again. She had to warn him. She had to. A twig snapped under her foot. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet forest. Elena's head whipped around, her eyes scanning the trees. Did you hear that? What? That sound? Someone's here. Rosa pressed herself flat against the tree, her heart hammering so hard she was sure they could hear it. She closed her eyes and prayed, something she hadn't done in years. Please, God, please don't let them find me. Please. There's no one here, Carlo said nervously. You're just paranoid. Maybe, Elena said slowly. Or maybe whoever dug up David is still watching. Come on. We need to get back to the house and figure out our next move. And Carlo? If you even think about running or turning on me, remember that I have evidence of your involvement in all of this. You helped me bury him. You're just as guilty as I am. They walked away, Elena's threats hanging in the air behind them. Rosa waited until she couldn't hear their footsteps anymore. Then she pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She stopped the recording and immediately sent it to David Dot. Then she ran. She ran faster than she'd ever run in her life, back toward her cottage, away from the oak grove and the empty grave. Her lungs burned and her legs ached, but she didn't stop until she burst through her cottage door. David was there, and he wasn't alone. Frank Morrison stood next to him, a tall man with gray hair and sharp eyes. And District Attorney Walsh was there too, a woman in her 40s with an expression of absolute fury on her face. Did you get it? David asked urgently. Rosa nodded, unable to speak, and handed him her phone. They all listened to the recording, and with every word, Walsh's expression grew darker. When it finished, she looked at David. That's enough. That's more than enough. We have them. Frank was already on his phone, calling for backup. We'll have officers here in 10 minutes. They won't get away. David looked at Rosa, and she saw tears in his eyes. You could have been killed. But I wasn't, Rosa said simply. And now we have the proof we need. Now everyone will know the truth. Outside, the sound of sirens began to fill the air. Elena's perfect crime was about to come to a very imperfect end. Elena was packing when the police arrived. She'd already decided to disappear, at least for a while, until she could figure out her next move. 2 suitcases lay open on the bed, filled with clothes, jewelry, and cash she'd been hiding for emergencies, just like this. She'd always had an escape plan. Smart people always did. She was folding a black dress when she heard the sirens. Multiple vehicles coming fast up the long driveway to the mansion. Elena froze, listening. Maybe they'd found a lead. Maybe they were just updating the family on the search. But something in her gut told her this was different. She walked to the window and looked down. 4 police cars, lights flashing. Officers pouring out, moving with purpose. And then she saw him, David, walking up the front steps with District Attorney Walsh beside him, very much alive. For the first time in her life, Elena felt true fear. Not worry, not concern, but pure ice-cold terror that made her legs weak. He was alive. He was with the police. It was over. She ran to the bedroom door, but it was too late. She could already hear heavy footsteps on the stairs, voices calling out commands. There was nowhere to go. No more plans, no more manipulation, no more pretty lies to save her. When they burst through the door, Elena was standing by the window, her hands raised, her face pale but composed. Even at the end, she couldn't help but think about how she looked, how she appeared to others. Elena Rivera, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of David Hartley, the murder of Patricia Hartley, conspiracy, and fraud, the lead officer said, moving forward with handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent, ... The words continued, but Elena wasn't really hearing them anymore. She was watching David, who stood in the doorway, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not anger, not even hatred. Something worse, disappointment, sadness, as if she'd been someone who mattered and had thrown it all away. I loved you, David said quietly. I actually loved you, and you buried me alive. Elena opened her mouth to say something, maybe to apologize, maybe to try one more manipulation. But no words came out. What could she possibly say? She'd shown him exactly who she was, and there was no taking it back. They found Carlo an hour later, trying to board a bus to Mexico. He broke down immediately, crying and confessing everything, begging for a deal. He told them about Elena's plan, about the poisoning of David's mother over several months, about how Elena had researched exactly what drugs to use, what doses would look like natural heart failure. He even showed them where Elena had hidden evidence she'd kept as insurance against him, just in case she needed to pin everything on him later. It turned out Elena's backup plan had been to frame Carlo all along if things went wrong. She'd been careful to make sure his fingerprints were on everything, that he could be connected to every crime. Carlo was a fool, and Elena had used him perfectly. But now his testimony, combined with Rose's recording and the physical evidence, built a case so strong that even Elena's expensive lawyers couldn't break it. The trial lasted 6 weeks and became one of the biggest news stories of the year. Every day, reporters crowded outside the courthouse. Every night, news anchors discussed the case. The beautiful socialite who tried to murder a billionaire's son for money. The housemaid who'd saved his life. It had everything people loved in a story, except this one was real. Rosa had to testify, and she was terrified. She'd never been comfortable with attention, and now cameras followed her everywhere. But when she sat in that witness stand and told her story, speaking about how she'd heard David's cry for help and decided to act, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Why didn't you call the police immediately? Elena's lawyer asked, trying to find some hole in her story, some reason to doubt her. Rosa looked at him calmly. Because I knew if Elena found out he was alive, she would finish the job. And I couldn't let that happen. David is a good man. He didn't deserve what she did to him. But you're just a housemaid. Weren't you scared? Rosa bristled at the word, just. Yes, I was scared. I was terrified. But being scared doesn't mean you don't do what's right. My grandmother taught me that. Sometimes the most important thing you'll ever do is the thing that scares you most. The courtroom erupted in applause, and the judge had to call for order. But the message was clear. Rosa wasn't just a witness. She was a hero. David's testimony was harder to watch. He sat in that chair and recounted every detail of those 2 days in the ground. The darkness, the pain, the slow realization that he was going to die alone. Several jurors cried openly. Elena sat perfectly still, her face blank, showing nothing. When the prosecutor asked him how he felt about Elena now, David was quiet for a long moment. "I feel sorry for her," he finally said. She was so focused on money, on what she didn't have, that she couldn't see what was right in front of her. She could have had a real life, real love, real happiness. But she threw it all away for something that wouldn't have made her happy anyway. Money never does when you get it the wrong way. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Elena showed no reaction when the verdict was read, but her hands gripped the table so tightly, her knuckles turned white. The sentencing came 2 weeks later. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Carlo got 30 years for his cooperation, but he'd be an old man before he ever saw freedom again. Thomas Hartley released a statement thanking Rosa publicly and calling her a member of the family. But David did more than that. He'd already been planning to donate most of his inheritance to charity, and he kept that promise. But he also established a foundation in Rosa's name, focused on protecting and supporting domestic workers across the country. He set up a trust fund that would pay Rosa a comfortable salary for the rest of her life. Whether she worked or not, Rosa tried to refuse at first. "I don't need your money, David. I just did what anyone should do." "But not everyone would have done it," David replied. "You risked your life for mine. You're the reason I'm standing here. Please, let me do this. Let me honor what you did." Rosa finally agreed on one condition. Half of the trust fund money would go to her grandchildren's education. The other half would go to other housemaids and domestic workers who found themselves in trouble and needed help. David agreed immediately. The story didn't end there, though. 3 months after the trial, David was sitting in what used to be his study, going through his mother's things. He found letters she'd written, but never sent. Journals where she'd documented her suspicions about Elena. Reading them broke his heart all over again. His mother had known something was wrong, had tried to warn him, but he'd been too blind to see it. There was a knock on the door, and Rosa entered with tea. She'd refused to retire, insisting that she still wanted to work, though now it was more as David's assistant and friend than as a maid. "You okay?" she asked, seeing his face. "Just thinking about my mother, about how I didn't listen to her." Rosa sat down across from him. "You can't change the past, David. You can only learn from it and do better going forward." "I know. I just wish I'd been smarter, more careful." "We all wish that about something," Rosa said gently. "The important thing is you survived. And now you have a chance to do something good with your life. That's more than a lot of people get." David nodded slowly. "You're right, and I'm not going to waste it." Over the next year, David threw himself into charitable work with a passion he'd never had before. The Hartley Foundation grew, helping thousands of children and families. He spoke at events about his experience, about the importance of really seeing the people around you, about how someone you overlook might be the one who saves your life. And Rosa? She became a voice for domestic workers everywhere. She gave speeches, helped establish better protections and rights, and mentored young women who were just starting out in similar positions. She was interviewed by national news programs, invited to conferences, even met with lawmakers about workers' rights legislation. One evening, almost 2 years after everything happened, David and Rosa stood in the garden.